icon.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to EduMatch Tweet and Talk number 27A. We are doing a very special edition of the Tweet and Talk, so that's why you see it says 7 o'clock right now. So welcome to everyone who's joining us. Please follow along with us on Google Plus at bit.ly/TweetTalk27A, as well as on Twitter with the hashtag EduMatch. Speaking of EduMatch, if you want to be our featured person of the day, then please go to edumatch.education and fill out the Google form there so we get to know you. So just wanted to shout out DigSit Summit UK. Follow that hashtag on Twitter if you're not already doing so. A great forum and a great conference about digital citizenship, very important in our world today, as well as hashtag ECGC16, standing for EdCamp Global Classrooms. Shout out to them. All right, so tonight's topic, we are actually going to dive into some political issues going on around the country that involve educators and students all in a couple of different areas of the country. We're going to be talking about Detroit and Philadelphia specifically. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and throw it over to the moderator for tonight. We have Valerie Lewis on the Google Hangout, and we have Joven on Twitter. So thank you to the both of you. And Valerie, just going to go ahead and throw it over to you now.
All right, thank you guys for joining us tonight. So we are talking about disturbances. And so with my lovely panelists here, and Joven, thank you for holding it down on the Twitter side, I'm going to allow everybody to introduce themselves, and then we'll start in this order. Chris, we'll start with you, then Cynthia, then Dorian, then Josh. And so what I'll ask all my panelists to do is, first and foremost, introduce yourselves, tell everyone where you're from, what you do, and while you're introducing yourself, think about the word disturbance and how you would define that. And if you don't have a definition, think about things that might be best associated with the word disturbance. So introduce yourselves and tell us what comes to mind with the word disturbance. All right, Chris, we'll start with you.
Hey everybody, Chris Rogers in Philly. I work at a local independent school, but very much so connected to the struggles and the, of our public school system, and also really like lifting up the communities, right, that are facing those struggles. So I work with Teacher Action Group Philadelphia, as well as supporting the Caucus of Working Educators. They are sort of like a union caucus working towards elections right now, and trying to bring the teachers union to more of a social justice platform. And when I think of disturbance, particularly in the classroom, I think about it as like a miscommunication or a moment of differing agendas amongst students and quote unquote like teacher leaders. I try to think about it. I try to think about it at its core as a difference between two different agendas between like a human piece. I think sometimes when I think of disturbances as I'm the teacher and they're the students and they're disturbing me, I forget sometimes that we're all in this space together and that we are all human beings in this room. So I've been trying to have like a more like human-centered way of looking at it, and not just think of like students disrupting what I'm doing, but how I might be disrupting what they're doing as well. So, yeah, that's how I think of disturbance.
Very good. Thank you, Chris. And that's definitely a good way to look at it. You know, we're always thinking about disturbances in what's happening to us, but not always looking at how we may be disturbing the peace, so to speak, as well. So thank you for bringing that up. Cynthia, introduce yourself and tell us what comes to mind when you hear the word disturbance. Unmute yourself, Cynthia.
Okay, unmuted. Hear me? Okay. So I teach middle school mostly, and I live in Vermont. When I think of disturbance now, I'm thinking of things that can come from outside of school, not just within a school building or within a classroom. So it could be something like a change to the way school is funded. If you are teaching at a school that has a way such as if the funding is disrupted because of an unwillingness to go along with some mandate from the federal government, or if you your test scores are suggesting that you aren't meeting progress expectations, then your funding might be disturbed, disrupted. And so there are things that are far beyond what happens in the classroom that can change what is required of us in the classroom.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cynthia. And we all know money disrupts a lot of things, not just in the classroom, but our homes, our personal lives. So absolutely. Dorian, we're going to pass the baton on to you next.
I'm sorry. Hello, everybody. My name is Dorian Roberts, and I teach for Detroit Public Schools. And I would consider what is a disturbance, probably right now what we're going through as teachers in the city of Detroit. And disturbance is anything that preoccupies my mind while I am fully trying to engage and raise student achievement on a personal level, such as wage, lack thereof, lack of preps, consideration of a cutback in my insurance, anything that is in my subconscious that doesn't enable me to reach my kids to its fullest potential while I'm educating. That's what I consider a disturbance.
Wow, thank you, Dorian. Anything that preoccupies our minds, and that in itself is definitely a disturbance and a distraction. Very good, thank you. Josh, if you would add to the mic, let's speak on it, brother. Tell us introduce yourself to us and tell us what comes to mind when you think of a disturbance.
Yes, my name is Josue Falaise. I'm a principal at a junior high school in central New Jersey. When I think of disturbance, just as everyone has added, but I'm going to go even more so, because even legislation, we see with the Common Core, Park, all these things were disturbances to the educational platform, and it disrupts things dealing even with educational equity. So that's how I look at just disturbance, just taking us from not just the classroom, but even just a whole educational spectrum all the way to legislation, when people are in a disagreement, and it just disrupts the whole process operation of all students, policy, from the smallest child all the way to even college.
Very good. Thank you, Josh, for that. So yes, absolutely. When we got pieces of legislation, things Common Core, Park, anytime someone brings something in, that could be a disturbance. And then so once again, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Valerie Lewis, a Georgia educator here in Gwinnett County, language arts teacher of 10th and 11th graders. And so disturbance to me is the interruption of a settled and peaceful condition. So if there's no peace, there is going to be a disturbance. And if we look back in history, we can think of many historical moments where there have been some disturbances and some disruptions. So here it moves me to my second question. Is there ever a time where the disturbance is necessary? Is a disturbance necessary? So when we listen to the definitions that we all gave, they almost had a negative connotation, something that we did not want. Close the door, slam it, push it out. But is there any time where it is necessary? So I don't know if we want to go back into the same order, or some of us need a little bit more time to think about that. All right, Josh said I'm ready to go in. Floor is yours, and then we'll take Chris next.
I think disturbance is if we're going to start off with legislation. First of all, it started with No Child Left Behind. That swept the whole nation, and people were up in arms. The positive thing with the disturbance of like No Child Left Behind was it required people to pay more attention to the subgroups or the areas that we normally did not pay attention to, and it was obviously just in context of testing. So like ELA, excuse me, the English language learners, second language learners, as well as special needs students. They were an afterthought and kind of sort of, because even when you looked at your test results, yeah, they didn't perform well and it didn't count towards it, like it didn't matter. So the No Child Left Behind brought a focus on them, brought monies attached to it, and now required people to intervene differently for them. So that is where at a point where the disturbance was needed. The Common Core, when again, as you tried to move it at the nation level, that disturbance looked at us disturbing us from a perspective of looking at revising curriculum, testing as a whole. Was that needed? Yes, in a sense, because there was so much disparity from state to state, and a national type of curriculum, national type of assessments only benefits everyone unilaterally, even though within the state there's still some disparities also to try to equal it. But in those sense, that's where I believe that the disturbance was needed, necessary.
Absolutely. So when we think about those kids that are often forgotten, that are often left behind, that are often considered our outliers, which, believe it or not, I had a principal that instructed that our ELL kids and our special needs kids, we don't teach to, because they are outliers. And pretty much he said that very same thing. They impact our test scores in no kind of way. So I almost felt like he was saying we're just simply babysitting those kids. So I agree with you there, Josh. That was a moment where disturbance is necessary. Chris, and then Dorian.
Valerie, your definition of disturbance, and you brought in peace, and it brought me back to considerations of justice, right? And where there is no justice, disruption, disturbance is always necessary to sort of like redirect our attention onto fairness and creating just systems. One example that comes to mind, like a great story, sort of like a mentor example for me. In Baltimore, at the around the time of sort of like the Baltimore uprising, I was connected to a math teacher there, Jay Gillen. He works with students of the Baltimore Algebra Project. And Algebra Project is like a high school intergenerational mentoring program where the students are like waged employees and working with their peers to in service of math education, but also in service of social justice. Started by Bob Moses, has a very long history. But right at the time of the Baltimore uprising, when everybody was in the streets around the murder of Freddie Gray, these students left school, went to like the Baltimore Algebra Project's office, and began to organize the community around, well, how do we take this opportunity and redirect our community towards justice and grieve for the life of Freddie Gray. Jay Gillen, he's as a math teacher, particularly talked about what is my role as an educator in supporting students in that process, in that learning process. And it was just like an awesome example of like having students like lead in following and having teachers follow like these disruptions, rather than the way that we think about disruptions as sort of like this top down, right? We think about like Common Core or this sort of like testing thing. It comes from sort of like this on high, but like this was a perfect example of students who were not just thinking about their education, but thinking about their lives and allowing that to bubble up into their education. And I think anything is more important in our classrooms is to consider like how we can be whole people in the classes.
And that's a great point that you bring up, Chris, because as educators, if we cannot stand with our students without feeling like the hammer's going to come down on us, so to speak, with the teacher that stood with the Muslim students and lost their job, if we can't stand with them, then are we standing against them? Because is that how they view us? What are our roles as educators? How do we teach them to organize things, conduct peaceful protests, amplify their student voice, but know that us as educators, is it our responsibility to teach them how to galvanize, how to organize groups like that? So thank you, Chris. That is that's a very good point that you make. If we can't support our students, then do we become the enemy as well? Dorian, we'll jump over to you.
I think that everything that Chris said really hit it home. However, I guess tonight I'm coming more so from the teacher standpoint, or the teacher voice. I feel that most educators, probably 90% do more than a good job of making students connected, teaching our students, and engaging our students. However, I do feel that along the way, the educator's voice has not been taken seriously. I do feel along the way that people put us in charge of these young minds every single day, and we're constantly told that we're not good enough, we're not doing enough, we're not equipped to do enough. Now, in some states, I know here in Michigan, one of the things that they're trying to do is to equate the student achievement based on the evaluation of the teacher and test scores, and not putting into play the background of a student. I have students come to my class hungry. I have students come to my class from domestic violence. Those are things that governors, lawmakers, politicians, they do not, and I repeat, they do not consider those things when it comes to the whole child and student achievement. And with that being said, I feel that it is time for educators to be recognized, to be taken up for, and to be voiced and considered a true element and a true factor of education. And that is where I feel a disturbance needs to occur.
Absolutely, Dorian. A disturbance is definitely necessary in that aspect. I know that Cynthia has also been following along a lot with what's been going on with the Detroit public schools, and so that gives us a pretty good segue to go into some of the issues going on with the Detroit public schools. So I know through our EduMatch Voxer group, there have been a lot of things we've been talking about, spending money on outside consultants, where teachers don't necessarily have the resources and things that they need to work with kids. Dorian, I remember you mentioning over the summer where there was a loss of wages or benefits, insurance. We are service workers. Whether people recognize that or not, or they put that on paper. So service workers means that we're in a sacrificial line of work, where we understand that though the money may not be high, but our hearts are invested in this work. And never should there be a time where educators have to come to work themselves worrying about how they're going to pay their mortgage, wondering whether or not they can provide health care for their own sick children, or we can't take a day off of work because we don't have enough sick leave. These things should never be a concern for service workers. So Cynthia, as you've been following, and I notice on your Twitter feed, you've been keeping up with this story, what are some of the things that you notice in terms of going on with Detroit public schools that are definitely a disturbance and they need to be spoken up for? Unmute yourself, Cynthia.
I did. I'm sorry. Can you hear me? Do you hear me now? Okay, I thought I had already done it. Okay, I was thinking on a different line before you asked the question, but I will direct my answer to what you had asked. As far as Michigan goes in particular, Michigan is a northern state. I've never been there. I think sometimes we think of the constraint on voting rights as being something that is confined to the South and has been over time. Actually, the question that I had in my mind as far as disturbance went all the way back to when schools were required to become integrated. The year exactly, I don't remember, but in the 50s. And now here we are in 2015, and in this decade in Michigan, we've seen a constraint, even in the 90s, late 90s, on I guess democracy, if you can define it that way, and that emergency management has become a way of governing. So instead of allowing localities to be able to decide who is in charge of the finances and so forth, the governor who was elected was able to come in and assign emergency management to different municipalities, but also to different parts of government, such as the Detroit Public Schools. And so it affects people disproportionately based on race. So if you have a state that has a certain percentage of African American descent, for instance, and because they are more prevalent in an area where there's been more economic disturbance, that they might be more apt to be affected by this lessening of their democratic rights. So, everything from not being able to get a ID to be able to vote because of lessening in the amount of services to be able to get their ID, and then they're not able to decide on how their finances are determined as far as school funding and so forth. Do you see where I'm headed in that direction?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you're making a valid point, Cynthia, and I know Dorian wants to jump in, and I'm not sure. I think Chris typed some things on the side there. Maybe he wants to jump in after Dorian. So Dorian, go ahead. Thank you, Cynthia.
Mm-hmm.
I know, Valerie, we've had tons of conversations about this in EduMatch or on VODSER, and I really want to go back to one of the statements that you made about us being servants. Police officers are considered servants. Firefighters are considered servants. Your postal workers are considered government servants. However, I think that we should be held to the standard of paying servants for their services. And I don't think that happens in education. Before I was an educator, I was a journalist for the NBA. I've seen NBA lockouts. I've seen players protest on the court. I've seen it all. And those issues of someone getting paid $1 million versus somebody getting paid $2 million for making a basket versus someone being able to continue steps. You have some teachers who have gone 10 years without a step increase or without a raise. Those are the kind of things that I think that we as voters need to focus on. I don't understand how you can put your child in someone's hands and then you don't want them to have any type of lifestyle or any type of payment. And one of the things that they said here here in Michigan on one of the Facebooks for educators. It was a question posed on Facebook for educators is how many teachers have filed bankruptcy or who have been in foreclosure for their homes. And it was an astounding 70%. And everybody is not on Facebook. Every teacher is not on Facebook. So that's just going for the ones that speak of themselves. And real briefly, I don't see, I'm not going to say you go into teaching for the money, but I did expect to go into teaching to be able to pay my bills and to live comfortably. Not to be going to the Grammys, but to live comfortably.
Absolutely. Chris, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I mean, because this conversation, right, particularly like what Dorian's talking about, and like the fight for living wages right now, which is going on all over this country. Some like you can look for it under the sort of like hashtag Fight for 15, right? Of like the fight for living wages in a union, and how so like not only like you see like this wage and benefits decrease and this disinvestment into sort of like public services, but also you see how it's like even politicized in our classrooms. Like one of the things I always come back to is one of the things that's been growing, right? And you even got Michelle Obama being like even like adding to this narrative of like everybody, there's no excuses, you have to go to college, right? And you like behind that, right? And nothing wrong with going to college. I think I went to college. I got a couple degrees, but I think what's behind it too is this: the only way that we know you can sustain your life is through this sort of like college degree. And so we have students who are taking on massive debts to get these college degrees, and then still don't have sort of like are very precarious to have jobs which actually support them and are protected and their benefits protected. And the sort of like public fight that we could have around the protection of living wages and the protections of unions and benefits seems to be sort of like very, very small. So I think about how can we come back as a community to fight for sort of like these things that we all deserve. And I think about my mom was a public school teacher, and I know growing up in Chester, PA, a lot of the struggles that we faced at home was the same struggles that a lot of the community and the students and their parents were facing as well. And I think when we think about our connections to the classroom, you have groups like Teach for America and this sort of like growing import of teachers into communities that are not of their own. And like how is our relationship with the communities and our relationship to like the burdens that the community faces being shared amongst everybody. And it really creates like a community that can begin to stand up against these issues. So I definitely rambled right there, but I really think it's important to like recognize our role as educators and how it's connected to like a ongoing onslaught that's particularly like healthcare. Healthcare and education is going through the same level of privatization right now, and it's interesting to think about how we can come together to fight and combat that.
And that's a very important point, Chris and Cynthia and Dorian, that you guys all made. Josh, I'm not sure if you're still with us. If you can hear me, I want to give you an opportunity to jump in if there's something that you'd like to add as we start to bring this thing to a close.
Yes. Just as everyone has brought the services, I want to bring it towards the educational aspect. With the school systems, there's a book that I read a few years back by Diane Ravitch, The Reign of Error, The Hoax of Privatization of American Schools, where she breaks down all of the, I guess, the trickery, the subterfuge, as far as people wishing, or organizations and legislations to even support the urban schools, but yet they're taking over. The greatest thing is the charter schools. There's trickery into bringing the charter schools in there. It's not saying that the purpose of it is wrong. It's the purpose of there when you look at trying following money. They talk about even like Teach for America, the purpose of entering 2 years, and yet the people end up leaving. So it's never really like a a roots, was it like a ground roots type of way of bringing teachers in to engender them in the culture, to really support. But he said they worked for 2 years and end up leaving, end up becoming, administrators and superintendents, everything else leaving. And so those type of things is where it looks good on the surface for the urban areas, but it's really not efficient and effective long term. And again, there's a district in New Jersey. I grew up in Montclair, New Jersey, which is they have Montclair and Upper Montclair. Remember, they tried to bring a charter school in Montclair because most of the parents are now they have this new train station. Most of the parents are now almost millionaires. They've driven out the people that have economically advantaged or economic disadvantage, and they said no, and the charter school just left just like that. Whereas you got the districts like you said, Philadelphia, Detroit, Michigan, these large cities, there is no option for them. You got the mayor of Chicago who worked with Obama. Now it's just like they're decreasing funds, increasing requirements, and there's all this clandestine meetings, everything else about the systems and teachers in it. And regardless of who you bring in, there is no change.
Wow. And you know what? You guys have said a mouthful, and I know that this is a very heavy topic that can go in 100 different ways, sure. And I know we can't get it all in this short time frame, and I'd love to probably extend this conversation more. But as Dorian was speaking, it asked Sarah to go ahead and screen share some of those images, some of the things that we've gotten from Twitter, the Chicago Tribune, where you saw parents actually coming in and leaving a note on the door saying room 104 is clean because the schools were dirty. That Aramac deal just wasn't working. And the parents actually coming in to clean the classrooms where their kids can actually focus and be learning in sanitary conditions. Things like that definitely shouldn't happen. Where you see the contents, as we mentioned before, Marzano and his cousins and the twins and all of them coming in and getting millions and millions of dollars to talk to a group of people that they can't even relate to and identify, but yet those very same teachers that are teacher leaders in their own buildings, they can't even pay their insurance. They can't even get a wage. They can't even buy simple bulletin board paper to put up, but yet Marzano and his cousins are benefiting from the check. When you're talking about the conditions in Philly, all of these things are disturbances. And Chris said something very important at the very beginning, social action platforms. So I don't want to leave this conversation undone, but with those of us that are sitting here on this panel right now, we need to find those groups in our communities as educators, and we need to show up and we need to show out. It's one thing to stand on a corner and protest, as you saw some of the images that were on the screen with poster boards, but we have learned that sometimes marching and showing up doesn't always get recognized, and it doesn't solve anything in some cases. So we need to find those community groups that are going to hold the powerful accountable. I know here in Atlanta there is a group called One Atlanta, and let me tell you, baby, they are shaking stuff up. They are knocking on people's doors. They are coming by the droves, and they are making people answer. They are organizing house meetings all across, just like they did in the civil rights movement. And they are training individuals on how to show up, how to ask questions. And those are the movements that we need to get back to. So that way our voices are heard, and that we don't get things like our number 4 question, the disturbances in our classrooms, where we don't feel the support of administrators, and we have kids that are out of control. These kids are, they're acting out things that they don't know how to express. They're dealing with things in their homes, in their communities, and they're bringing that baggage into our classroom. So how do you meet a child, as Dorian mentioned, that's dealing with domestic violence, or the school is the only place they can come to eat? So imagine over these next 2 weeks when we are on winter break, the schoolhouse is not open, lunch is not being provided, breakfast is not being provided. Imagine when those kids come back after these 2 weeks, 2 weeks of probably hunger. What are we going to be dealing with in January? That's a disturbance by itself. So it looks like Sarah's saying we have scheduled. Is it a continuation of this show for April? April. So hold on, you guys, for April to continue this conversation. But in the meantime, let's not let April be the only time we come back and put some action into place. We want to come back with a report in April that says, here is how we as educators stood with our students. Here's how we as educators went and stood on our Capitol building step house. This is how we got in touch with our district representatives and our state representatives. Let's disturb the peace, people. And sometimes that may come at a price point that is scary for us. It may be, we don't know we're going to have a job tomorrow. But I guarantee there's going to be somebody, and there's a God that I serve that I know that is greater, that's already got something in plan for us. So ladies and gentlemen, continue to disturb the peace. Don't look at what's acted upon us, but let's figure out how we can shake the system up ourselves. So thank you all once again for joining us tonight. Sarah, I'm turning this back over to you, and I'm getting off my pulpit.
Thank you so much, Valerie. Wow, that was amazing. Thank you to everyone who was on panel. Just, oh my gosh, awesome conversation. I'm so energized. And yes, we definitely have to come together as educators and support one another when we have these injustices that are happening. So to definitely bring them to light and to take action against them together. So thank you all so much for being part of this awesome discussion. Thank you to Joven on Twitter. This podcast will be storified immediately, and it will also be available on iTunes in the next coming weeks. So come back next week. We're going to have a topic about New Year's resolutions in 2016. So if you're interested in being on panel, anyone can be on panel as long as you are involved in education and have something to say. So if you want to sign up, the link is bit.ly/tweettalk28, 28, the number 28. So also we have our Blabathon going on December 30th. So that's going to be a look back at the different podcasts that we've had this year. There's still a few slots left. So the slots are going fast. So just check the EduMatch hashtag on Twitter for the link to that. And also trying to give a huge shout out to the organizers of Ed Camp Voxer. My co-organizers, we have Nicole Howard, Carla Jefferson, Rochelle Wooten, Shayna White. So check that out. Ed Camp Voxer, the link is on Twitter. And if you want to subscribe to the EduMatch podcast, then check it out at bit.ly/EduMatch podcast. So thank you again to Valerie, to Chris, to Cynthia, to Dorian, to Josh, and to Joven, as well as to everyone who participated on Twitter. So have a great night, everyone.